Bonsoir, mesdames et messieurs. Bienvenue à l'Université Concordia. Mon nom est Graham Carr. Je suis vice-recteur à la recherche et aux études supérieures ici à l'université. And I want to welcome you this evening to the third of 4 public conversations being brought to you by Concordia University and the Globe and Mail on the topic of living well and staying healthy. And it's good to see so many of you here this evening. We have close to a full house tonight, and I'd like to take advantage of that moment to remind you that the fourth and final in the series of conversations will take place on the 1st of May, and invite you to register for that by going to our website, concordia.ca. Our moderator, once again, for tonight's conversation is our friend André Picard, the highly respected public health reporter at the Globe and Mail and one of Canada's top commentators on public policy. Comme je sais que plusieurs d'entre vous déjà savez, André est journaliste spécialisé en santé publique pour le Globe and Mail et auteur de plusieurs succès de librairie, dont The Gift of Death, Confronting Canada's Tainted Blood Tragedy. Il est renommé à travers le Canada et à l'extérieur pour son écriture sur un éventail de questions. Alors, veuillez me joindre en accueillant André à nouveau. So tonight, Andre will moderate a conversation on the topic of mental health in the workplace. And our distinguished conversationalists are Steve Harvey, the Dean of the John Molson School of Business. For those of you who don't know, you are in the John Molson School of Business. And Mary Deacon, the Chair of the Bell Let's Talk Mental Health Initiative. So let me just take a few moments to say a few words about our two guests. Mary Deacon leads the Bell Let's Talk Health Mental Initiative, which, as I know many of you are aware, is a national charitable and awareness program promoting mental health across Canada through, among other things, the Bell Let's Talk Day anti-stigma campaign. The initiative also provides significant funding for community care, as well as access, research, and workplace initiatives. In fact, it is the largest corporate commitment to mental health in Canada's history. And I'm delighted that Concordia University is part of Bell's mental health initiative. In fact, earlier this year, Bell announced a $500,000 donation to Concordia's Applied Psychology Center and Center for Clinical Research in Health to improve access to mental health therapy, and we are very grateful for that generous support of our research and outreach and activities. Mary assumed her role as chair of the Let's Talk initiatives after some 25 years of determined leadership in the not-for-profit sector, including almost a decade as the inaugural president of the Center for Addiction and Mental Health Foundation, which leads fundraising for Canada's largest mental health and addiction teaching hospital. Steve Harvey has been my colleague as the Dean of the John Molson School of Business since July 2012. He's coming up to his first anniversary here at Concordia. And his research interests are in the areas of industrial and organizational psychology, including issues such as work-related stress and well-being, trust and management, the experiences of young workers, and aggression in the workplace. Steve's research has been widely published and recognized, and one of his current interdisciplinary projects is funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research and the Fonds québécois de la recherche sur la société et la culture. These connections between research and the wider world are at the heart of the research mission here at Concordia, and research focused on primary and secondary health prevention is an area where we are fast developing expertise and reputation. But finding ways to communicate our research and make it accessible to the public is equally part of our institutional mission, and that's the spirit behind tonight's conversation series. So without further ado, let me turn the podium over to André and look forward, along with the rest of you, to a great evening. Merci beaucoup. André?
So thank you, Dr. Carr, for that fine introduction. Bienvenue à Concordia. Le Globe and Mail est fier d'être un commanditaire de cette série de conversations. J'espère que ça va être plaisant ce soir avec notre conversation. Tonight our topic is mental health, and as you heard, more specifically, mental health in the workplace. It's said that there's no health without mental health. That's why it's so important. And I write, as a health writer, write increasingly about mental health, and it's really an artificial distinction now between mental and physical health, we're realizing. They're one and the same. And mental health issues, mental illness, is one of the most common chronic illnesses that exist. It rivals cancer, heart disease, COPD, right up there, in terms of the number of people affected, the cost, etc. In fact, mental health costs the Canadian economy as much as $51 billion a year, depending on how you do the math, what you calculate in the statistics. And about $28 billion of that is direct costs. The other stuff is loss of life, loss of pleasure of life, etc. Stuff is a little more difficult to measure, but it's a whopping amount. And it's a lot of people. Today, as we speak, about 6.7 million Canadians are suffering from some form of mental illness. That doesn't mean everyone who's, we kind of have this image of people with schizophrenia living on the grates on the street. That's the extreme end of it. That's the picture we have, but most people with mental illness live in their communities, they work, they volunteer, they bring their kids to soccer, but they suffer, and they often suffer alone, and quite painfully. So there's a lot of stigma about that. These illnesses, depression, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anxiety, bulimia, there's a whole long list of them. They can be quite devastating. And they have a particular impact on the workforce because, as I mentioned, almost everybody who's sick stays at work in some way or another. Every day, about 500,000 workers in Canada will be off the job due to psychiatric and psychological problems. We often joke about mental health days, but for employers, they're not a joke. They're a reality, and they're very costly and devastating in other ways. About 8% of all workers today are taking medication for conditions like depression and bipolar disorder. That's a significant number. Sick leave alone, related to mental illness, costs employers $17.8 billion a year. That's why employers are starting to pay attention, and that, I suspect, is part of the reason the auditorium is full tonight. But the paradox is that workers still don't feel comfortable talking about this stuff. The polls tell us that the workplace is the place that people feel least likely they'll get support. They're afraid about talking about their illness. So about 2/3 of them keep their diagnosis secret. It's like an iceberg. Most of it's under the surface. But it creates these problems like presenteeism is a term you'll hear tonight. People who are there, but they're not really there because they're sick. So that's my introduction, setting the stage. And now I'm going to bring out the experts. So I want to welcome Mary Deacon and Steve Harvey to come out and join me, and we'll have a little chat. This is Mary, by the way. Now, you can never be sure these days. You gotta point these things out. Can take nothing for granted. So I'm going to wade right into it with a tough question. Actually, I want to start with a really general one, but an important one. And it's the why question. Why mental health? Why is Bell Canada interested in this giant corporation? Why do you care about mental health to the point where you're giving away $50 million, where you're investing in these charities?
Right. Well, as you talked about in your introduction, the cost of mental illness is huge, but it's also, it's serious, it's pervasive, it's underfunded, and it's highly stigmatized. And it's an issue that, we really felt corporate Canada hadn't no one in corporate Canada had really taken a leadership position, and so we thought it was an area where perhaps if we were to step up in a significant way, we could have an impact ourselves through the activities, through our investments, through our partnerships with the community, but also we could perhaps create a platform that would enable others to join the conversation and other organizations to do more of what they can do, which is to provide the kind of frontline service, to do the kind of research that's going to make the breakthroughs and ultimately result in the transformative impact that we'd like to see.
And you're really riding a wave. This is an issue that's really hit the public consciousness.
Yeah, I think it's the issue whose time has come. Oh. You know, it's like cancer 50 years ago and AIDS 20 years ago. It's finally, I think, reached the point where it is becoming part of the conversation. And my hope, we have Bell Let's Talk Day every year in February, but I hope the time is coming very soon that you don't need a special day to talk about mental health, that every day is a day you talk about mental health.
So I'm going to come back to Let's Talk a little later, but the other thing that I've noted, I've written about mental health for a long time, and I'm always struck by everybody has a personal story. It's
Right.
never about just the workplace or about the guy on the street. There's always something really personal. There's no family I've ever met that's untouched by this. And you have a personal background in this too. Tell us a bit about, if you don't mind sharing,
Sure.
how this drives your interest as well.
Sure. So, when I was growing up, I was pretty much like any other suburban family. 4 kids, mom, stay-at-home mom, dad worked, and as we grew up, I had a brother who seemed a little bit different, and I was sort of a little bit shy, but when you don't really know anything other than what you know, right? We didn't know what was normal. We thought we were like everyone else. We thought every family was like our family. If you fast forward,
They are.
but with these kinds of things, and yet what we did was, I thought, for example, in my case, things were very hard for me growing up. But I thought the difference was everyone had the same issues. I just was not able to pull up my socks and get over myself. And that's part of what we call self-stigma in mental health, which is a big problem. So as I got older, got married, had my first child, and 2 weeks after I had my first child, my youngest brother, David, the golden boy, medical student at U of T, well on his way to a great life and had a great life, popular, did well in school. He died by suicide. He was 25. And this shocked our family, as it would shock any family, I think, profoundly. And I say this, meaning no disrespect at all, but I remember my mother saying, it isn't possible that David killed himself because he wouldn't do that to us. So again, these are very common things when we were growing up, these kinds of attitudes and behaviors. It was shortly after David died that I went to see a doctor and saw a psychiatrist and was diagnosed with depression, and eventually had to be persuaded to take medication because that would prove that I was crazy. And my doctor had to use the analogy that is not infrequent, which is if you have diabetes, you're going to take your insulin and you're not going to think twice about it. It's not a judgment issue. It's not a moral issue. It's not a weak issue. And so I did, and it had a profound effect. I remember the first day I came out from my underground garage and the sky was blue, and I thought, hey, the sky is blue. Now that's a very simplistic thing to say, but it had a profound impact. So that was the beginning of a really good part of my life, helping me to deal with anxiety and depression. Not too many years later, my other brother, Ted, who'd always struggled his whole life, also died by suicide. And, this, as much as we had learned and knew at that point, there was nothing that we could do, right? He was an adult. The options available to us were virtually, well, very, very limited, and he took his own life. So that's my family experience. I got involved at CAMH as a fundraiser after having several other jobs.
And if I could just, CAMH is the Centre for Addiction and Mental
the
Health
Center
in
for-
Toronto, because we're in Montreal
Right.
here. We don't know all the jargon that I do. So,
Right.
yeah.
And I'd been a fundraiser working for two different organizations when my brother David died. And when the opportunity came along to lead this new organization, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, in their fundraising, I thought, well, I know about fundraising, and I have a passion now for mental health, and I'll never be a doctor, and I'll never find the cure for depression, and I'll never bring my brother back. But maybe I can make a difference by trying to raise awareness, reduce the stigma, raise money, and help to really make a difference in the way that I could. So that was how I got involved, and I never looked back. It was the best decision I made to combine my professional experience with something that there's nothing I have more passion about than mental health.
Well, thanks for sharing that, and I'm going to come back to this, the importance of talking about it and addressing stigma, because I know that's a big issue with you as well. But I want to not forget Steve, too. So Steve, I want to come back to, everybody has a story like Mary, not necessarily as profound, 2 suicides in the family, but everyone's touched by mental illness. All these people work. Should, not just put it as a crude question, but should business care about this, or is that just a personal problem, or is it a business problem as well that needs to be addressed, this whole larger mental health issue?
It's a good question, because business often asked itself that question over the years, and I think in many cases they still ask themselves that question. But more and more businesses are no longer asking themselves that question. They've come to realize that, first of all, a large portion of a person's life is spent in the workplace. And the experiences that we have in life are what create our realities, and the situations that we have are created within the workplace accordingly. So they do have a responsibility to a certain extent to live up to the responsibility, to live up to those experiences and to help us deal with them. And it's not just a bottom line issue and so forth. Initially, one would fear that businesses were staying away from the issue because they were afraid that they would be held responsible for paying for the full burden associated with mental health issues, particularly if they were to admit that somehow the organization was responsible for the problems. But I think we've grown out of that era. We're moving into an era in which businesses are recognizing that they're part of a social network of experiences that people have, and they have to play their part in that. More importantly, I think the reason that they've come to realize that is not so much in the savings that they can realize, and that people are improving in performance and increased satisfaction, and, if you wish, commitment to being at the workplace in a healthy way. But I think they're also doing that because they're realizing that it's the right thing to do. It's the sustainable thing to do within our environments. So I think businesses are waking up to that reality, and they're moving in that direction for the right reasons.
Now, does someone say, I have cancer and I get better and I return to work, I get treated pretty well? Do we still do the same to people with mental illness? Do they get treated as well, or do we kind of turn our eyes away?
I think we want to treat them as well. I think what I'm finding in certain organizations is that they're not sure how to accomplish that. There's a discomfort that goes with talking about mental illness, and it's not just about there is the stigmatized person who themselves have a difficulty in speaking about it, but it's even more difficult sometimes to pry in other people's lives, as it would seem if you're coming from the employer's perspective, to talk about those issues. And whereas it's much easier to say, how is your health, physical health, better since you've left, it's much more difficult to say, you've gone through depression, explain to me how things are now. It seems that we're prying and getting people to, and particularly in business world, to feel that it's okay to talk about those things, and we need to talk about those things because that's part of the reintegration process.
But it's not easy for business, right? There's privacy issues. It's not visible that someone's sick.
Absolutely.
Where there's a lot of ignorance in the true sense of the term, where people just don't know that people with mental illness get better, et cetera. So it's hard for business, right?
It's hard, but the good thing is just that it's something that's easy to fix. When ignorance is the problem, education is at the heart of the solution to it. And I think that there's some very simple but very clear things that business can do to deal with the issues. And I think Bell is a great example of a great example of that in action.
Yeah, and I'm going to come back to you and ask you how you're training your students to go into that new world in a minute. But you did give me a perfect opening to ask Mary about, Bell giving a lot of money, that's wonderful, but what are you doing on the hardcore business side to make things better within Bell? Because you also do that as well.
Right, so part of our $50 million campaign is, there's kind of bookends. There's the external anti-stigma campaign, which is Let's Talk, and then there's the internal effort on workplace mental health, which I think of as the other bookend. And it was imperative that we lead by example in our own workplace. And at the time we started the program, we said, we are going to lead by example. Do we know the path? No, because really that path has not really been laid in a corporation like ours. There is no playbook. But we're going to make an effort, we're on a journey, and we're going to identify things that we can do. So we did a few things. One of the things we did was fund the creation of this new voluntary standard for mental health and wellness in the workplace. And this was really important because, as I say, there really was no playbook. So a lot of activities going on in a lot of different organizations, but what is like the best practices and how's a company to know?
I don't want to interrupt you, but just so the audience knows, so this is a publication from the Mental Health Commission of Canada, and it's kind of standards for the workplace in the way that the Canadian Standards Association has standards for all kinds of things, but
Right.
This is for dealing with mental health. And
Right.
It's really a first, not quite a first in the world, but it's quite
yes,
new.
Yeah, I believe it is almost a first in the world, and it was put together by the Mental Health Commission as well as the two standards, BNQ and CSA. And it's available for free on those websites. It's a really important tool. It's tools, not rules, to help companies look at what they do, identify their gaps, do tangible, practical things to fill those gaps. It asks for, some governance, some accountability, and a commitment to continuous improvement and review, which is the way to kind of inch forward in your own business, whether you're large or small, and whatever kind of workplace you have. So
and you can do all this stuff in advance. You don't have to wait to have the suicidal worker to deal with
that's
in a
right.
crisis.
It's preventative. It's health promotion and prevention. That's going to have an impact in the long term on your employees' productivity, on their wellness, and ultimately on your bottom line. So we funded that, and that took a couple of years to get going. In the meantime, we said, okay, what can we practically do to start on our journey? And there were a couple of very specific things we did. We made a commitment to education, to educating internally, to getting the conversation going internally, to, as you say, address that issue of ignorance in not in a pejorative way, but lack of information, lack of knowledge, to help dispel the myths that are commonly held about people with mental health issues, that they're lazy, that they're not really sick, that these aren't health issues, that these are personal issues or moral issues, to help kind of erase the line between the body and the head, in terms of people's attitudes and knowledge. So that was one very important part. And we do a lot of things all during the year with our own employees, whether it's on our website or live and in person with mental health experts coming into our campuses and talking. The two other things we've done that I think are going to be very helpful, not only for us in our workplace, but also as something that we can help share with other corporations, are our efforts on manager training. Managers have a critical role in creating the environment for employees to be successful. And so what we did was we actually put in place mandatory face-to-face mental health training, 2 to 3 hours, for all of our people leaders, and made it mandatory because, people don't know what they don't know. And one might argue that those who need it most would be the ones least likely to attend. So let's level the playing field. Let's let's make it clear that everybody's in the room because they have to be there. Nobody's outing themselves in any way, shape, or form. And let's build that level of competence and knowledge, number one, mental health literacy, but also create that opportunity for dialogue and for people to be open and exchange. And that happens in those sessions, which is really, really encouraging, I think. In terms of the meat of the material, they learn about early warning signs, what to do and say, what not to do and say, how to have those difficult conversations that people tend to shy away from. What are the resources available to you? Where do you turn? And the feedback has been great. And it has resulted in our managers feeling more confident and equipped to have the conversations that they do when they have employees with other kinds of health issues, which mental health is just another kind of. And then the other one is what we've done in the area of return to work. And that is where we've really looked at our model and looked at what we need to do differently in order to better support people who leave the workplace with mental health issues, and how to ensure they return healthy and well. And the research shows, and you know that, and our company is no different than most others, that 30% of the short-term disability claims approximately are a result of mental health issues. They account for a significant portion of the cost.
70% of the cost.
70% of the cost. So figuring out, how to support employees. We may not know what is the perfect thing to do, but it is the single largest category. So we better figure out what to do, right? So it really is everyone's issue to deal with. So we've put in place some different things. We've done a pilot, and it's still early days, but it is showing improvement on 3 measures which we are doing. One is employee experience. So you talked about somebody going off with cancer, coming back, and how they feel and how the workplace feels, and about welcoming them back.
They get flowers on their desk.
Yes.
The people with mental health don't necessarily.
Right, they get visited in the hospital, and the person with mental health doesn't get visited. Do you see what I mean? So we've been gauging the employee's experience, and it's much more positive. They feel respected. They feel like they've been treated like they would if they had any other form of illness. Very, very important. But the other 2 things are more quantifiable. One is length of absence, and the other is relapse rate, which can be very high. And we're showing some early promising signs, and so we're continuing to roll this out across our company. And my hope is that we have a year or 2 under our belt, we have enough information that we can actually say, you know what, you make these investments, you do these things. There is a package of things we're doing. It's not just the return to work. And it has a positive impact on the bottom line because it's reducing length of absence, frequency of absence, number of absence, and relapse rates.
Yeah. So Steve, from that, I want to come back to that question. I went to business school, but it was early in the last century. And I know we didn't talk about this stuff at all, let alone what to do about it. Are students now learning about this? Is research being done? Because as Mary said, they're sort of going in blind. There's not a lot of research on what works and what doesn't. Is this becoming important in business schools like the Molson School of Business? Are you doing this stuff now? Or?
It's a part of the curriculum. If we're talking about content-wise, certainly there are at least a couple courses that students must take while they're doing a degree, whether it's an undergraduate or graduate degree, that will point them into the area of human resources and organizational behavior. And it's a standard topic within these areas that you cover mental health issues through stress, in particular in the workplace, and health in the workplace. So it's becoming common. In fact, if you look carefully at the textbooks over the years, that section of it has been growing in terms of the importance of it to a certain extent. However, I must say that other than those that would study within the area of human resources in particular, or management generally would not go any further in studying in that topic. There are some specialized courses that one would take in university that would allow them to move further in that direction. Occupational health and safety as an example of a standard course that was probably always offered in business school for some time. would almost exclusively be focused on the physical elements of health and safety. Now, the proportion that is given to the topic of mental health is growing significantly. In fact, in some volumes, you'll find that it makes up a large portion, if not half of the volume, to a certain extent.
Well, it should probably make up about 70%.
70%, if that's where the cost is, absolutely. So there's a growing recognition of its importance within the field of human resources in particular, perhaps not so much within the larger area of business. And I think that that's certainly something that all business schools are going to have to think more broadly about. My personal view about it is, we're becoming attuned to issues like sustainability, and to me, mental health in the workplace is nothing more is something that should be part of the sustainability discussion as well too. It's about sustaining a healthy work environment, and whenever we're talking about those important issues, the mental health issue should be included within that conversation.
And you don't want to be, you've had an employee, you've invested 15 years in them, they get sick. You don't want to just throw them overboard, right? Because you've made an investment in it practically.
Absolutely. So there's the business end of it as well too, that matters.
Now I want to switch gears a bit and talk more about, I know I've taken you a little out of your comfort zone. I want to talk about your area of expertise in your research, and that's the stress area. And, we talk constantly about stress. But I'm interested in your views on what's the link between stress and mental illness and all this workplace, stuff. Where does the stress come in?
Well, the stress, the best way to think about stress within the workplace is to see it as a process. And the process has three key elements to it. There are stressors that we encounter on an ongoing basis. And when we talk about stress, what we're talking about is the experience of stress. And when we encounter stressors, we feel stress, we perceive situations that create reactions, psychological and physiological reactions within. And that has an impact in some ways and consequences of what we call strain. So when we study stress within the workplace, we're interested in various elements within that process. And in particular, what we tend to focus on is the notion of stressors. What are the things that people encounter in the workplace that are going to create that stress response that we're so concerned about? Because the stress response is something that is common to being human being. It's something that we can encounter in the workplace, or we can encounter in the world outside the workplace. But what we're really interested within the workplace is how is the organization creating stressful situations through stressors that we need to deal with in order to keep a healthy workforce. So my interest, or the interest generally speaking, tends to be within those stressor environments, within the stressor environment. So what are those things? We have to identify them. And there's some interesting findings that you will find depending on the companies that you're dealing with. So one of the areas that I've been particularly interested in over the past 20 years is the notion of bullying and aggression in the workplace and the impact that has. One would think that that's something that other people live, but when you broaden that discussion and you include in there the various rudeness and incivility encounters that we have and so forth, which sometimes are more powerful in their impact than the actual explosive events that we have, you start to realize that it is a very important stressor that, frankly, 20 years ago we didn't even know was a problem. So there's a lot of discovery that is still occurring within the stress area that is identifying some of those elements. And some of those elements are emerging because, of course, the nature of work is changing. We know that globalization has created different work environments, has created different expectations and situations that are a novel experience to even those of us who are thinking, we think we're experienced within these environments, and we're not.
But stress isn't always a bad thing, right? You can get a real rush from it. It can help you get something done.
I was talking about that earlier before arriving here with a colleague, saying, the notion of eustress is fairly broadly known, and it's been around for some time. And that notion is that we do need a little bit of stress to create a motivation within us to do what we do on a daily basis. We will procrastinate unless we have a little bit of emphasis that pushes us in a certain direction.
A fire under a certain part of the anatomy. Now, Mary, we know stress is not a mental illness,
right?
But stress, with mental illness, what matters is, you have the chemicals in your brain, you have the environment, and you have the triggers. And stress can be a trigger. So how do you accommodate, I guess, people with mental illness? If someone is amputated and is in a wheelchair, we'll accommodate in the workplace, we'll build a ramp. But What do you do the equivalent of ramps to, say, someone who has depression and they're really sensitive to stress? How do you do that stuff practically?
Right. So it's really about understanding, and we do this, part of our new processes have to do with return to work meetings, when people are coming back to workplace. So much as you would if somebody had, let's say, had a broken leg and they're coming back and they're still in a wheelchair, but it's time to sort of start getting back at it, and they're going to have a gradual return to work. And so, their desk will need to be adjusted. Some have to get into their office or space, ramps, so on. You have the same kind of conversation, and what you find often with people who've experienced mental health issues and are coming back, the gradual return to work is very important. And things that have to do with, noise, loud noises, multitasking, the environment, light, too bright lights. So you need for some silence or some quiet, different kind of pace on work while you're sort of readjusting, are the important things. But I don't think we can, ignore the thing that I think it really comes down to, which is a certain civility and respect in the workplace that I think as a society, in all aspects of our society, we're kind of not as polite as we used to be as people. And I think that impacts the workplace. You talk about bullying, you talk about respect, talk about the way you you communicate with each other. I think our ability to kind of remember those things are really also important in dealing with people with mental health issues.
So it's a parallel a bit to the physical disability movement, which says we don't want accommodation. In fact, ramps are good for everyone. And it's the same thing with mental health, being civil and not tolerating bullying. That's good for everyone. It's not just for the folks who have mental illness.
Yeah, and it's more than having a policy that bullying isn't allowed and we must be respectful in the workplace. It's living those things in the workplace. And that culture, that's harder to make happen. And, I think that's what I'm hoping that, happens through the course of the increased dialogue about sustainability and, what it takes to have a healthy workplace, being able to retain and recruit talented people and showing that you respect and value your greatest asset, which are your people. Doing those things is good for people and it's going to be good for the bottom line.
But Steve, isn't there still this culture, and you study bullying a lot, isn't there still this culture of the macho, the boss who leads and he's the tough guy? And is that still accepted, or is that gone entirely? Or
it's not gone entirely. In fact, it's quite prevalent within certain types of organizations. Use the typical, stereotypical construction industry as perhaps one that we could say that imagine what kind of behavior is tolerated within that context versus within a university context. They're going to be different. I think we can all recognize that typically what is accepted will vary. But is that right? Should it be accepted? Because those environments do cross. They are part of the society, and what we're learning from all of those environments have an impact on us all. It continues to be a reality. It continues to be something that we accept. We saw, for instance, just in the news, the recent firing of a basketball coach who, for many years, was allowed to continuously abuse his players, and presumably somebody assumed that was part of coaching, that was accepted, that was something we can do. In fact, if you go in those environments, you will see quite rude behavior very often.
I saw it on a Snickers commercial. It must be true.
Exactly. So there is that tendency, and it's hard to break that trend. And within other environments, it's more clear that it is problematic and so forth.
And is that change driven by, are we just better people, or is it driven by lawsuits, by the fear of litigation, things like that, or a mixture of the? What's bringing about the change, I guess?
In the recognition of
yeah,
I think the change has evolved over time. I think if you look at Quebec, for instance, some of the changes that have occurred, and we have, in 2004, we have a new psychological harassment legislation that was introduced. That legislation was closely mirrored on legislation that was related to sexual harassment in the workplace. And we also had issues of racial harassment and so forth over the years. So progression has brought us to recognizing that it's not just certain groups that are being harassed, but all of us are being harassed in various ways in the workplace. So we evolve in our understanding of what it means over time, and that's what we're seeing. As we perfect one area, we move on to another area and recognize we've got a problem. And I think that that's where that's emerging from mostly, is just a growing understanding in our society that there's more to accomplish.
Better business.
Better business, absolutely.
Okay. Now, Mary, I promised I'd come back to Let's Talk, and I'd be remiss if I didn't. So I want to say Let's Talk several times, because you're going to have to give me a nickel each time, right? That's how it works? Or is that
But only on Bell Let's Talk Day.
Okay, well, I'll call you again.
But I want you to talk about it every day.
So, very successful campaign, award-winning campaign, et cetera. You raised, I think, $4.8 million this year. I think my two children raised about $2.4 million of that with their texts.
Thank you. Please thank them for me.
So I'm still paying the bill, but regardless.
No, but you're not paying the bill because
only their phone bill.
That's right.
There you go.
That's right.
But more seriously, I want to talk. What's the good and the bad about that? Because there's been people, including my own newspaper, who've been very cynical about that. They're just doing it for the attention. It's, they're getting $50 million worth of publicity for $5 million. There's a lot of cynicism about it. Why is it good? Why is it bad? Talk a little about the cause.
So, no organization before Bell had really adopted mental health. And in my time at CAMH, I tried. I can tell you, right? It's one of my greatest failures as a fundraiser was trying to get a corporation to adopt mental health as a cause of choice. And I was unsuccessful for the reasons you would expect, which are fears about reputational risk, fear that it says something about the company that it's,
full of crazy people
or making their people crazy. Risk averse. Why would you do that when you can focus on something that has no risk?
Like breast cancer walks.
Or lots of causes that nobody is no corporation would say, well, if we get involved with this, it's going to be somehow potentially a risk to our reputation. And so not choosing mental health would have been a far easier thing to do. And yet we did it precisely because it was something that was so stigmatized. So in fact, I look at it as an example of leadership and boldness on behalf of Bell. And the feedback we've gotten across the country about what we've done has been very positive. And the cynicism, I understand the cynicism, but I can tell you, I've been there from day one, and the motivation is to make a difference. And I can tell you as well that having worked in the mental health field and with my personal experiences that I've had, I would never be involved in something that was completely token, because I want to make a difference. And, Bell is making a difference. I'm helping them make a difference. And, so yes, there's been a cynicism, but I think the benefit to the country has been important, and the way our community partners feel has been really important. What I love hearing is the stories from the grassroots organizations who say, you know what, thanks for the money, and we'll do really good things because we've never had very much money, and we do everything based on passion and commitment. But what you've done by acknowledging what we've done has been so good for us as we've toiled in the trenches for years without any recognition. And the way we've approached it is we've created the platform. On Bell Let's Talk Day, we allow the experts to come in. Where all of our mental health partners, people with lived experience, have a platform to talk about the things that they are best able to talk about. We're not the experts.
But you said the word leadership a couple of times in passing. It ultimately comes down to the leader, right? This doesn't get approved at a low level. And George Cope, the CEO, he's made this his cause as well. And that's important, right? In businesses, it has to come straight from the top.
It does. There are really, I think, 4 things that are needed. You know, when you look at companies and they're saying, okay, what can I do on this issue of mental health? There's 4 things. And I have so many companies call me and say, okay, like, what do you do? And there's 4. Leadership, awareness and education, training, policies and procedures. And, you know, I talk to them about the awareness, and the training and the policies and all of that. And they say, yeah, but how did you get that first one? How did you get, the big guy, the C-suite, and he is
6'9",
to do this? And that is leadership, right? Nobody made Bell do this. This was something where the leaders in the organization, the board, the executive, and George said, you know what, this is an area that hasn't had the attention. This is a cause. It's unacceptable in the 21st century that there's a cause that people won't talk about, a health issue that people won't talk about, and we're going to use our asset, which is our brand, to advance this.
And again, his mom had an influence too, right? There's always comes back to the personal.
Everyone has a story. Everyone has a story.
And I'd add to your list, your 4-point list, I think number 5, Clara Hughes, Can't Go Wrong.
Clara Hughes, you can't go wrong. Who also has a personal story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And Steve, leadership, how important is that for your issues, for stress, for bullying, for mental health? It comes down to that, right? If you're going to have a good workplace, it's going to be a reflection of the boss. If there's a boss who describes people as lazy bums, malingerers, they're not sick, this stuff is never going to get dealt with, right?
Absolutely. If you look at the literature, and we did a wide literature search some years ago where we looked at interventions, and those interventions that seem to work for mental health in the workplace or stress reduction in the workplace. One of the key factors that kept popping up was top management support, and the key to the top management support runs central to all of it. And when you try to explain why that's so important, I think the key to it all is businesses are busy places. I mean, we live in a complex world where there's a lot of priorities that face us on a daily basis, and if something has to stand out at the end of the day if it's going to get done. You can say it's important. I think we would all agree that these things are important, but at the end of the day, if you have time to do 6 or 7 things and there are 20 things on your list, you want to make sure that mental health is at the top of your list, otherwise it's not going to get resolved. And that's key. It's very important. And once the top management and management gets involved, then it becomes the organization that is clearly concerned with it because they see that this is a priority and they follow suit. And it really does take an entire organization working on these issues to make them to work in the long run.
So it has to become part of the culture.
It has to become part of the culture. Some of our research now, we're looking at, one of the things I'll be looking at in particular is looking at the culture and the climate within the organization and seeing that it is my belief is that it is a main predictor of the ultimate success of these programs over time, because it is what sustains when management changes, when people move on and new people arrive. That culture needs to sustain that involvement, that priority setting that's important. And if you look in a parallel area, you'll find that 50 years ago, we had real problems that are similar within the physical safety area. We were nowhere near then where we are now. Yeah. And some of the major issues that were dealt with because of leadership, and they were dealt with because of climate and culture change. So those are extremely important, and I think they're going to be central to us seeing change in the area of mental health.
So I've been hogging the floor, so I want to invite, if people have questions, come up to the mics. There's one on either side. Vous êtes invité de demander des questions en français, si vous voulez. On va faire de la traduction si nécessaire. And while the gentleman's making his way up, Mary, I just want to ask you, you deal with a lot of groups, you give them money, but you just deal with them every day for all kinds of reasons. Like me, I talk to a lot of these groups. There's really inspiring stories. Tell me one that's really stuck with you, that's influenced you, like where you go, wow, this is amazing work, and they did it on a shoestring. I'm sure there's 50, but is there one that pops to mind?
There's so many. I have a particular soft spot for programs around art therapy. One of the things I think is so cool is people with mental health issues often are described by what they can't do, not by what they can do. So it's about disability, not ability. I mean, Vincent van Gogh was brilliant, and he was artistic, and he was mentally ill. So we invest in programs, and there's many of them all across the country, that use art as a way to build self-esteem, build self-confidence. And there's one in Toronto called Sketch. And it deals with at-risk and homeless youth with mental health issues. And it's amazing. I've met a couple of the young people who've gone through the program, you know, who you could clearly see the trajectory of their life was not going well, and yet through the program they connected, they got self-esteem, they got some structure, they made friends, you know, a job, a home, and a friend. You know, they got some housing, they started to feel, well, maybe I could go to art school, maybe I should finish high school, maybe, and you know, I was at an event a few weeks ago where I met one of them, and it's just the transformation in that young person's life is remarkable.
And it's something I like to repeat all the time. We forget that people get better.
Yes.
You know, we like most physical illnesses, most people get better. The same with most mental illnesses.
The majority of people get better, and they're just like you and me.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they're not that.
Well, hopefully they're not like you.
So yes, go ahead.
With all due respect to the panel, I think you've been dealing with the tip of the iceberg rather than the iceberg itself. Namely, you've been addressing symptoms rather than causes. Now, leaving aside biochemical elements for things like schizophrenia, most of the stressors that you've been talking about are social. And there are a great many people who are not working in happy working places. There's the question of job insecurity. There's the question that many workers feel alienated from decision-making processes. They feel harassed. They feel bored or overstressed. The list goes on and on and on. And management is not, they feel there's a big discrepancy between what they're getting paid and the astronomical salaries that important people are getting. So it seems to me that we haven't really been addressing the real elephant sort of in the room. And as a postscript, if I may add, that's somewhat ironic in terms of universities, because as I think was evidenced last year in the student protest here in Quebec, which was about more than just simply tuition increases, I don't think the universities are quite setting an example of happy warriors either. So it seems to me we have the blind leading the blind, so to speak. So how do we get around this and provide the kind of fruitful, happy, constructive workplaces that you think should be our aim, our goal?
Great. So Steve, do you want to tackle that? What, you know, there's a lot of crap.
Yeah, Steve. Yeah. Over to you.
Sure. You know, this notion that, in fact, there are a lot of crappy workplaces. What do we do about
There are a lot of crappy workplaces, and it's going to be a real challenge dealing with them. And as our question began, all of those elements that you listed are very well known to us doing research in those areas, and we recognize that those are major issues that need to be dealt with. The difficulty, of course, is in the workplace is being able to make those changes in what they consider to be a highly competitive world. And that's why the world is recognized through the World Health Organization that the 21st century, the biggest health issue is going to be mental health. Mm-hmm. And a large part of the problem they identify comes from the workplace. And a large part of it is because how do you bring this to a halt, or at least deal with it when you're entrenched in a system in which people are highly competitive, organizations are highly competitive, and the way to get out of that is to rethink the way that we do work, and it's not obvious how that's going to be done.
And if I may add just one small comment, outsourcing isn't the answer either, because apparently that's what many management people have decided, that they'll outsource and they won't have to face these problems, because people in third world should be grateful they have employment regardless of the conditions under which they operate.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank
And
you.
a reminder that these issues are not unique to North America or the Western world. They're really global.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Lynn McVeigh. I'm the new Chief Executive Officer at the Douglas Mental Health University Institute here in Montreal. And I'm really coming forward to express my gratitude on behalf of our Mental Health Institute to Bell for your leadership in this initiative, and also for funding in Montreal at our Douglas Mental Health Institute our brain bank, which studies depression and suicide prevention. And so Bell identified that this was an area that needed extra support and made a $2 million donation to the Mental Health Institute at the Douglas, and we're very, very grateful. And it's actually leveraged government to have more research protocols approved, even here in Quebec, which is tremendous, tremendously supportive. I also wanted to congratulate the Molson School of Business for having the courage to have a conversation about mental health, and thank you to the three of you for that. And I'm getting to my question, which is really about a story of somebody that I know very, very well, and after giving birth to her third child, suffered from quite a severe depression, and was actually given the message that she couldn't really come back to work unless she was fully well. And our researchers support what they're doing at Bell, which is encouraging in the workplace a gradual return to work, and we know that that's actually very therapeutic for patients. And so my question really to you is, do you actually, in your policy of return to work, I heard you mention the gradual return to work and the kind of changes you create in that environment. Do you have a policy for actually hiring people who may have had lived experience with mental health? And are you finding that people are submitting their CVs with that information now, or is that too far a leap to imagine? I know for our patients, some of our patients that are recovering, they don't always do that. So.
Right. I find, generally speaking, that's not a thing that most people do, on their CV. No, I don't think I've ever really seen that. I have had a lot of discussions with people who call and share their stories and, talk about wanting to work and wanting to work at a place that is supportive of the issues of mental health, where they'll feel safe and welcome. And, I always move those resumes forward and try and create opportunities, whether they're within Bell or outside of Bell, because, there are a lot of places that can take advantage of the talents of people, and not just Bell. So, we take it pretty seriously that we want to try and make a difference. With the start of our initiative, our focus is on getting our policies and practices right to better support our team, the team that we have. And as we evolve and go forward, the issue of hiring practices will no doubt be something that gets looked at as well.
But there are all kinds of affirmative action programs for people with disabilities. Do you see that being extended to people with mental health disabilities as well, or is that too far a stretch?
Know. Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, the one would argue that the organizations who deal with disabilities also deal with people with mental health disabilities. Yeah. So there isn't the division between the organization who deals with physical and those with mental, at least not in my experience.
Okay, great. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Pierre Durand. I'm a researcher and professor at the University of Montreal. I'm a colleague of Steve. I have two questions. The first one is about stigma and what we call in epidemiology the labeling effect. I don't know of many people who will call their boss on Monday morning saying that they won't come in because they're quite depressed today. Probably the boss will say that you have had let's say, one drink too many or something like this. So people will tend to say that they have a huge cold or a huge back pain or something like this. So we feel as researchers that many physical complaints, are in effect some rather mental health distress of some sort. So I'd like to know if in the last 20 years or so, you've seen a change in the attitude that people have about declaring or stating the real cause of their problem when they choose not to come in to work. The second one is that, do you have some people in your company or other companies that you've worked with? What is the real concern? Some companies, we've worked with 2,400 workers in the last years, 64 workplaces, and many companies are saying, well, how can you be sure that somebody has a mental health problem? Do you have a specific test, plus or negative, positive or negative, a biological test that could confirm that you have a mental health problem? So is it, and this is a difficulty because we're working with questionnaires most often, and people often doubt in the business sector that you really have a mental health problem, and they'd like to put some money into getting a confirmatory type of test. Do you have some inputs about this?
So two great questions. And you remind me of, I once interviewed a psychiatrist who told me a lot of backaches occur above the neck, was the way he put it. So,
It's probably David Goldblum.
yeah. So Mary, that tough question. What do you do about fakers? Or how do you know somebody isn't faking or a malingerer, the term we used to use? How do you deal with that? Right. There is no blood test.
Right. So one of the things we cover in our training and our education is to disabuse people of the notion that people, it's kind of counterintuitive. If stigma is such a big issue surrounding mental health issues, who would want to say, I'm not coming to work today because I'm depressed, right? So that flies in the face of stigma to actually say that. So this notion of the majority, the percentage of people who actually are the fakers is less than 5%. Is that right, Stephen?
It's pretty low.
It's around 5%. So the majority of people who go off work for mental health issues are sick. They're not malingerers. They're not. That's the fact, and that's where the knowledge and education has to come in to the discussion. That most managers might very well agree with you that no, only 5%.
And there's no more people faking mental illness than faking backaches or the flu.
No. And to this issue of, is there definitive blood test? Well, that is, I think, part of what is compounded the issue of stigma over the years, that there is no definitive blood test or test. But, this is why we have doctors and experts, and it's not the job of the manager or me or somebody in HR to determine whether somebody is really sick or not. That's why we have doctors and experts whose job it is to diagnose. And, it isn't perfect, but the science has come so far in the last 10 and 15 years that there's a lot better information. And we need to rely on our experts.
Right. Go ahead. And I would just add to that, sometimes the problem is not so much people staying away from work. And I was talking about this with a colleague today, Gary Johns. It's the presentism. It's them coming to work and trying to hide the fact that they are having trouble and not getting the treatment and the help or the support that they need to move forward. And that's where the stigma has its real large impact. So I worry about that as well too, as much if not more than I do about them using other pretexts for not being at work. Because at least they're recognizing that they've got a problem at that point, and they're trying to find solutions by staying home. It's not the best solution, but at least it's a move in the right direction, as opposed to completely hiding it by continuing to go to work.
Yeah, as an employer, you'd rather they get treated for depression than be depressed at work for months.
Absolutely.
And you'd rather they get treated early, because early intervention and appropriate treatment has the best outcome.
So I think we'll try and squeeze in your last question because you're at the mic, so go ahead.
Hi, my name's Katya. I'm a crisis intervention worker at a crisis center, and we have clients that come, let's say, after a suicide attempt. They've been dealing with depression, anxiety, other mental illness for a long time. And at work, some employers will be very understanding. They'll get the time off, and they get on short-term disability. Problem starts with the insurance company. And these clients have to jump through hoops. Services like ours, even though they're extremely effective, can help them at that time where it's not necessary for them to see a psychologist, are inefficient for the insurance company, and they won't accept it. What can be done to educate the insurance companies and to help them along and to receive services that are in place in the community and that aren't necessarily meeting what their criteria is for help and for treatment?
So Mary, do you have that issue with the insurance companies? I'm sure.
And so the approach we took, and it's a very valid question, right? And again, this is the issue, I think, of leadership, and it's not, I would say, it's not about educating the insurance companies. It's more about having the people who pay the insurance companies, so the employers, be very clear about the kind of standards of service and the kind of services that they expect for their employees. And we certainly, when we adopted our mental health initiative and made it very clear that we had greater expectations around service and availability of service and types of services than we'd had before. We were explicit in that regard. And I find not always, because by no means are we perfect, but what I do find is that the experience of our employees going through, when I talk about that new return to work, a lot of that has to do with engagement with the insurance company, their caseworkers, with the employees, with our managers, with our team. They have a new message from Bell. And the experience, we've done surveys with our employees as they come back. They, not always, but in many cases feel much more respected and supported as they've gone through the process, including with the insurance company.
Yeah, and I would note that, I've been doing this for a long time. 25, 30 years ago, people with cancer got treated really badly by their insurance companies because they didn't talk about it. It was a stigma. Very similar to mental health today. And they don't tolerate that anymore. It became, it's what Mary said, it becomes societal pressure. It just doesn't become acceptable. So I think that's going to be part of it.
Yeah, and I would add to that our experience as researchers is that they're turning to us as well. They're asking us to partner in research and to better understand the issues. And I think in time, what was an issue with cancer is going to be the same with mental health, that once they have a better sense of where we're going and where we need to go with this, they'll be along. And the employers are an important factor in that.
So unfortunately, we're out of time. It went really quickly, which I know from where I'm sitting is a good sign. It means we had a good discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. You found it informative and enlightening and maybe a little bit entertaining at times, even though it's a heavy topic. So let me finish by saying thank you to Concordia and to the Globe and Mail for sponsoring the event. And please join me in giving a warm round of applause for Steve Harvey and Mary Deacon. And one last word, don't forget that the best way to combat stigma and these problems that were brought up in the question period is to talk about things. So let's talk, and not just one day a year. So there you go.
Well
Thank
done.
you.
Thank you.